There's a moment in your life that feels surprisingly freeing when it finally arrives. It's the moment that you realize you don't actually have to explain yourself to everyone. Now, let me clarify before we go any further. I'm not talking about being dismissive, not talking about being rude or shutting people out. I'm talking about something a little bit more subtle. Realization that your life decisions don't need to pass through public approval committee. Do you know those? I've seen many of them in my time so far. Because many of us explaining ourselves becomes a habit long before we realize that we're even doing it. Think about how often we explain ourselves in everyday life. We justify why did we say no, why we're tired, why we changed our mind. Sometimes we even explain decisions no one asked us about. Just so you know, I chose this because it's almost like we're writing footnotes constantly in our lives. And when you start noticing it, it can be a little funny because sometimes the explanation becomes way longer than the decision itself. I once caught myself explaining why I couldn't attend something. And oh my gosh, I gave such a context, the backstory, the emotional state, the weather conditions, the travel delays, a small documentary on my own schedule. It was ridiculous. And halfway through it, I thought, wait a minute, what am I doing? Did anyone actually ask for this level of detail? Do they even care? Really? I remember a time when I made a decision that felt very clear to me, but I knew that some people in my life would not understand it immediately. So what did I do? I prepared myself. I prepared explanations as if I was defending my own thesis. Not just one explanation, several different versions of it, depending on the audience. The logical explanation, the emotional explanation, the diplomatic explanation. And at some point, I stopped and thought, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Why do I feel like I needed a defense strategy? That moment stayed with me because the truth was I wasn't explaining for clarity. I was explaining for comfort, for other people's comfort, to make them feel okay with what I was choosing to do. And we usually learn this early on in our lives, that explaining ourselves helps keep the peace. If people understand us, they won't misunderstand us. If they don't misunderstand us, they won't judge us. Or at least that's what we hope. Guess what? People are going to judge you anyway. So we get very good at providing this context. But over time, something really subtle can happen. We start believing that our decisions are only valid if they're understood by everyone. And that's where the pressure cooker begins. Because understanding is wonderful, but it's not always necessary. Some decisions simply belong to you. I think a lot of thoughtful people struggle with this because we care. When you care too much, we care about relationships, about being fair, about being understood, about being thoughtful, being considerate. So when someone looks confused by our decision, we immediately jump to clarify. It's almost an instinctive reaction. Someone raises an eyebrow and suddenly we're delivering a presentation. Let me explain. How many times have you said that? But the funny thing is that sometimes the other person isn't even concerned. Meanwhile, we've already written this 5-page essay in our minds, ready to present and defend our decisions. Fact of the matter is, if somebody's trying to push you to make a decision in their favor or what they think that you should be doing, they're not even listening to what may be going on with you. They're not even listening or considering what's happening, what your situation is. Therefore, is it necessary to explain yourself? Sometimes you can give a one sentence and then leave it there. But the real shift happens when you begin to realize something more important. Understanding and approval are not the same thing. Someone might understand your decision and still disagree. For example, if you're invited to an event and you can't make it, somebody could say, you know what, I understand that you cannot make it. We are going to miss you. We wish that you could be there, but I understand completely. That is understanding. And that's okay. But, the approval part is something different. Once that sinks into you, the difference between someone understanding you and still being able to disagree, something changes. You begin to trust your decisions without needing everyone to validate them. You start allowing your choices to stand out on their own, not defensively, just quietly. When people stop over-explaining themselves, a surprising thing happens. Your energy will change. You're going to feel calmer, and your decisions are going to come more easily. You're going to spend less time replaying the conversations in your mind. You know, those ones that you play just on repeat. And perhaps, most importantly, you're going to start trusting yourself even more. Every time you allow the decision to stand without excessive explanation, you reinforce a very important internal message. You know, you're saying to yourself, I trust myself. I trust my judgment. And that's powerful to live from that place. You're not alone if you're feeling pressure to explain yourself more than necessary. I mean, many thoughtful people fall into this pattern because they care deeply about harmony and understanding. But there's a quiet freedom that comes when you realize something simple. Not every decision requires a detailed explanation. Not every choice needs to be justified. Sometimes the most confident thing you can say is simply, that is what feels right for me. And then let that be enough. People may be disappointed. They may be hurt. It's okay as long as you're doing it with respect and compassion and you're being true to yourself and communicating clearly. I want to leave you with a question today. Where might you be explaining yourself more than you actually need to? And what could change if you trusted your decisions enough to simply let them stand? Sometimes the very smallest shifts in how we carry ourselves create the greatest sense of freedom that we never thought was available for us, but it's just right there on the other side of just making a small shift for yourself. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment, reach out to us, be sure to subscribe, and I look forward to connecting with you next time.